Oh, hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to The Inner Darkness by Jørn Lier Horst, translated by Anne Bruce. Chapter 1. Line raised her head to peer through the door's wire mesh window. She could see him at the end of the corridor. Tom Kerr, walking towards her, escorted by prison wardens in front and behind. He had changed. Immediately after his arrest and during his trial 4 years earlier, his face had been splashed across all the media. Smooth shaven and with dark eyes and thick cropped hair. Well groomed in an effort to create a good impression. Now he looked more like the man he really was. Someone capable of the crimes for which he was behind bars. His shoulders were broader, his chest thrust further forward. A curtain of hair hung over his forehead, and his pale complexion was flawed. His angry eyes stared straight ahead as he chewed gum with his mouth open, a froth of saliva collecting in one corner of his mouth. When he reached the door separating him from the waiting police officers, keys rattled while Tom Kerr moved his head from side to side, hoisted his shoulders and rolled them as if to loosen stiff muscles. Line glanced across at Adrian Stiller, who nodded in response. She lifted her camera and took a step back, ready to film. The prison warden opened the door, sending a cold draught into the room. Tom Kerr's mouth stretched into a smile, as if someone had said something that amused him. As he crossed the threshold, Line caught him in her lens and started recording. He was wearing blue jeans, a gray t-shirt, and a dark training jacket. Adrian Stiller stepped forward to enter the picture. Half a head shorter than the man facing him, he held a folder in one hand and a radio transmitter in the other, making it impossible to shake hands. "Tom Kerr," Stiller said in an artificial, formal tone, "you've agreed to take part in a crime-related site visit." He glanced at the camera. "Everything you say will be recorded and from part of your legal statement. However, you can seek assistance from and confer with your lawyer as we progress, without that being recorded." Line zoomed out to include clause "thank" in the picture. The defense lawyer, dressed in a dark suit, wore a pair of black shoes hardly suitable for the forthcoming expedition. He had been involved in many controversial cases, and his clients were among the most notorious of criminals, the one from whom society needed protection. He was known as a capable advocate, but Line had never liked the way he trivialized his cases to the media. I'm the lead officer for the site visit," Stiller went on. "We'll both be equipped with a microphone and a transmitter to secure a recording of your statement." He gestured with the hand holding the transmitter. "I'm going to attach it to you now." Tom Kerr answered with a nod. Stiller handed him the tiny microphone so that he could tuck it beneath his t-shirt and fasten it to the neckband. Then he walked around him and spent some time attaching the transmitter to his belt at the back. Can you say something so we know that it's working? Test, Kerr complied, speaking in a rough, gravelly voice. Line checked the sound input levels on her camera and nodded to Stiller. She had prepared 12 hours' battery and recording capacity, longer than she had arranged for a babysitter. Do you have anything with you? Stiller demanded. What do you mean? Kerr asked. Do you have anything on you, in your pockets? No. Stiller produced a pair of latex gloves from his back pocket. I have to check, he insisted. Kerr reached his hands above his head, clearly a well-practiced move. Stiller ran his hands over the prisoner's pockets and the outside of his jeans. Open up! Tom Kerr stuck out his tongue and raised it to the roof of his mouth to demonstrate that he had nothing hidden in there. Take off your shoes, Stiller continued. Kerr placed the toe of one trainer on the heel of the other and flipped it off. I've been inside for 4 years, he said, stepping out of the other shoe. Do you really think I've found something in here I'd want to smuggle out? Without answering, Stiller picked up the shoe and stood with his back turned slightly from the camera as he examined it. Line looked up, her eyes on Stiller's back and the taut muscles beneath his thin shirt. Okay, he said, placing the shoes in front of the prisoner. Not counting the driver and camera woman, will be 6 persons in the minibus, in addition to you. Retching off the latex gloves, he cast around for a rubbish bin, but found none. Sergeant Graham will be responsible for security during the operation, he said, pointing at a police officer in a protective suit. Line brought him into the picture. Graham stood ready with handcuffs and leg irons and an additional precaution when transporting prisoners. He approached Kerr and indicated that he should hold out his hands. Kerr turned to speak to Stiller. Do I need to have leg irons as well? He asked, sounding dismayed. He's the one to decide, Stiller replied, gesturing towards Graham. This seemed to be a normal division of roles, with the uniformed officer taking charge of any confrontational aspects. You've been assessed as an escape risk, he stated briskly. The defense lawyer intervened. You're 8 against 1, and that's only in the vehicle, he argued further. Probably even more of you on the site. Is this really necessary? It's not up for discussion, Graham answered. You submitted a letter of complaint to the National Police Directorate and received approval for this site visit to go ahead without our officers being armed. You know very well why that's the case, the lawyer went on. 2 officers fired shots during his arrest, entirely without justification. It was sheer chance that he wasn't wounded. Ignoring him, Graham eyeballed Tom Kerr. Loosen your belt, he said. Kerr complied. Line held her focus on the image, documenting how Graham led a chain with a ring attached down the inside of one trouser leg and locked it around his ankle. The other end was fastened securely to the handcuffs. There was a real danger that Tom Kerr would attempt to escape. He had been sentenced to 21 years in custody with a minimum term of 15 years. This meant that after this period had elapsed, His sentence could be extended by up to 5 years at a time for as long as the law believed there was considerable risk that he would commit further crimes upon release. In reality, this sentence could entail a lifetime in custody. He had nothing to lose by trying to escape. "Are we ready?" Stiller asked. With a nod, Graham barked an order over the police radio. One of the waiting prison wardens unlocked the next security door, letting them through to the minibus parked outside. Line had kept her distance, approaching Tom Kerr only by means of her camera lens. Now he walked towards her. The handcuffs and leg irons caused him to take short steps and slowed his gait. As he passed Line, he turned and looked straight into the camera, so close that she could smell him. A dank, stale odor, reminiscent of the interior of a house left empty for a long time. Chapter 2. "Over there," Hammer said, pointing. A police car blocked the gravel track. Slowing down, William Wisting switched on his indicator and pulled up at the verge. The other vehicle reversed out to make room. A side window rolled down and a young policewoman stuck her head out. She was one of the newer recruits in the patrol section, but he could not recall her name. Driving forward, Wisting stopped alongside and lowered his own side window. It came to him that her name was Marlene Cott. "They haven't arrived yet," she told him. "We're a bit early," he said. "Has there been any traffic?" Marlene Cott shook her head. "We've been parked here for 3 hours," she replied, lifting a clipboard from her lap. A sheet of paper with a short list of names of those who had driven in or out was attached with a steel clip. "We're only talking about a handful of locals," she explained. Hammer leaned forward from the passenger seat and looked across. "No press?" he asked. "No press," Marlene Cott assured him. Wisting thanked her. A scatter of pebbles struck the wheel arches as he started up and drove on. The black fields flanking the car were freshly plowed, and the bumpy track eventually led into dense, deciduous forest. Deciduous, biology, falling off or shed seasonally or at a certain stage of development in the life cycle. Deciduous. Synonyms include evanescent, flash, fleeting, fugacious, temporary, transitory. Deciduous. The black fields flanking the car were freshly plowed, and the bumpy track eventually led into dense deciduous forest. At this point in the middle of September, some of the trees had already begun to shed their yellowing leaves. The track followed a low, dry stone wall. Here and there, narrow access tracks led to the occasional summer cabin. After driving for a couple of minutes, they arrived at an open space where the ruins of an old sawmill stood beside a meadow. Wisting turned and parked the car, making sure not to block access for the others when they arrived. It was 10:50 a.m. Pushing open the car door, he grabbed the frame with both hands to haul himself up and out. It was a mild autumn day with full sun. For a moment or two he stood listening to birds chirping somewhere nearby. Then he closed the door behind him, moved round to the front of the car, and leaned back on the bonnet. Hammer stood beside him with his hands deep inside his trouser pockets. "What do you think?" he asked. "It's possible," Wisting replied, squinting at the woods on the far side of the meadow. He and Hammer had been here 4 days earlier and walked along many of these narrow tracks. They were familiar with the terrain. Eftengland was a peninsula comprising almost 1,250 acres of rolling countryside filled with forest and agricultural land. To the east lay a marshy area before the road at Ullaveien formed a natural border. To the east lay a marshy area before the road at Ullaveien formed a natural border. In every other direction, the landscape ended at a coastline that alternated between smooth rocks and shallow sandy coves. She could be lying somewhere out there. Tara Nanorum. The young woman had been 19 years old when she disappeared on her way home from a party with some classmates at Bekkelaget, less than 600 meters from her own neighborhood. The search had started at around 2 p.m. the following day. All that had been found was her phone and one shoe. Nothing connected Tom Kerr to her disappearance, but 2 months earlier, Thea Polden had gone missing in the same way from a residential area at Stovner. Someone had pointed out the similarities, but serious speculation had not begun until Salwa Haddad had vanished on her way home from her boyfriend's house in Hellerud. 3 girls of the same age had disappeared in similar circumstances. The badly beaten corpses of Thea Polden and Salwa Haddad were later found near Noklevan Lake. Tara Norum was the second girl to disappear, but as the case unfolded and subsequently in court, she was referred to as the third victim, the one who had never been found. "But the dogs should have detected something when they were here," Wisting pointed out. Removing a sachet of snuff from beneath his lip, Hammer tossed it on a heap of grey sawdust. "It was nearly 5 years ago," he said. "I don't know how efficient they are, really. Anyway, it's not certain that her whole body is in one piece. After all, the others were dismembered." Deep in thought, Wisting drew the toe of his shoe across the ground. It was 5 days since they had been informed that Tom Kerr's third victim might be hidden in their police district. A fellow prisoner had contacted the prison authorities and told them that Kerr had confessed to him that he had murdered Tara Norum. Confronted with this allegation, Kerr had surprisingly admitted this to the investigators in the Cold Cases Group at Kripos, the National Criminal Investigation Services, and expressed his willingness to show them where he had buried her. "I don't know what Tom Kerr is up to," Hammer went on, "but I don't entirely believe that he wants to cooperate with the police." "Strategy," Wisting said. Kerr had requested a move from the penal institution where he was currently held to the less draconian conditions at Holden Prison in return for his confession. Draconian, of laws or their application, excessively harsh and severe. Draconian. Kerr had requested a move from the penal institution where he was currently held to the less draconian conditions at Holden Prison in return for his confession. This would mean that he would be spared contact with prisoners with mental illnesses and give him greater educational opportunities. A full confession would be regarded as settling up with the past and also demonstrate the kind of changed behavior deemed necessary for later assessment of parole. Wisting had no confidence that in the long run this would help Kerr leave prison. The man's crimes were so brutal and so permeated with evil intent that it would take far more than this to warrant releasing him back into society. The negotiations with Kerr had involved both the Director General of Public Prosecution and the National Police Directorate and had continued for several weeks. Wisting himself had never had any dealings with Kerr, as Oslo Police District had investigated the killings. Kerr had no connection to Wisting's police district, but now he had pointed out Refsholt Sawmill as the most appropriate assembly point for him to show them the burial site of his third victim. He had obviously been there, as he had given a detailed description of the meadow, the old sawmill and the remnants of machinery left there, but he had failed to explain why he had chosen that particular spot. The police radio on Hammer's belt crackled into life. The prison transport with Kerr in custody announced its arrival on the main road. When Kerr had designated an assembly point, the area surrounding the sawmill had been searched with cadaver dogs in the hope of beating him to it. This had failed to yield results, reinforcing the arguments of those who felt that the site visit itself was being arranged as cover for an escape attempt. In the early hours of morning, a checkpoint had been set up at the end of the approach road, and several undercover vehicles had been placed at strategic intervals on all the surrounding roads. They had taken every precaution. Chapter 3. The black minibus was escorted by 2 uniformed patrols. Behind them, the lawyer followed in a Mercedes with tinted windows. A caged police dog began to bark as the vehicles drew to a halt. Adrian Stiller was first to step out. There had been no active investigation of Tara Norham's disappearance in the past 4 years. All stones had been turned. The trail had gone cold and the documents transferred to the Krippos Cold Cases Group as a matter of routine, giving Stiller responsibility for the new investigation. Wisting and Stiller shook hands. "Helicopter?" Stiller asked, lifting his eyes to the blue autumn sky. "The new helicopter has been redirected to a search operation in Kongsvinger," Hammer explained. "A 9-year-old has gone missing. They can be here in 30 minutes though. The old one's in for overhaul. Graham has been informed." Hammer nodded in the direction of the burly policeman who stood at the open sliding door of the minibus, talking on the phone. Kittle Graham had attended the preparatory meetings at which the various responsibilities had been divvied up. On the actual expedition, Wisting and Hammer's only role would be as observers. I would have organized a flyover and heat-seeking camera to see if there's anyone in the area, Stiller said. He approached Graham, and after a cursory consultation, it appeared that they had decided to go ahead. Once Graham had issued a few brief orders, the sniffer dog was brought out and the minibus began to empty. 2 policemen stepped out first, followed by a policewoman. Wisting gave the female officer a passing nod. Maren Dokken. When she had served a probationary period in the Criminal Investigation Department, she had proved impressive, possessing the analytical eye needed to pick up on crucial little details. She would one day make a fine detective, but at present she was working in the patrol section. Line emerged with her cine camera. Wisting, who abhorred the idea of her involvement and disapproved strongly of Stiller employing her for this purpose, folded his arms across his chest. Their professional paths had crossed before, she as a journalist and he as a detective. They had both been clear about their individual roles and retained their individual integrity, but he did not take kindly to her coming so close to a man like Tom Kerr, so near to such evil. Line, more far-sighted, saw the bigger picture. She had secured first refusal on the rights to use the recordings later in a documentary film and had been in contact with a production company interested in her idea. That was not difficult to understand. The crimes Tom Kerr had committed were unusually bestial, and his trial had failed to elicit all the answers. Far from it. Tom Kerr had undoubtedly had an unknown collaborator, someone the media had dubbed the Other One. Wisting's main objective had been that there was too much scope for roles to be at cross purposes in such a project. Line could not work on a documentary at the same time as working for the police. Although aware that her employment with Kripos had to end formally before she could proceed with the documentary, she felt that her presence during the site visit would provide a unique narrative approach. Anyway, that was all in the future. First, Tara Noram's murder had to be cleared up and Tom Kerr found guilty in a court of law, which could take years, but it was a process Line was keen to follow. Wisting drew back to join the others, who were huddled in a semicircle around the minibus. Tom Kerr appeared in the doorway, and his leg irons jingled as he took a final step down from the running board to the ground. Pausing for a moment, he first raised his head to gaze at the sky before scanning all the individuals whose presence this operation necessitated. His eyes finally rested on his lawyer. "We need to talk," he said. Klaus Thank stepped forward and glanced across at Stiller. "Where can we do that undisturbed?" he asked. "You can go back into the minibus," Stiller suggested. Thank's features took on a skeptical cast, as if he suspected the vehicle might be bugged. "Can't we do it in my car?" he queried. Stiller looked at Graham, who responded, "If I can have the car keys." Digging them out of his pocket, Thanker tossed them to the policeman. "Take off the recorder," Tom Kerr insisted. Adrian Stiller moved forward to remove the microphone lead and transmitter while Kittle Graham examined the interior of the lawyer's car. "Into the back seat," he said, holding the door open. Once the lawyer and his client were seated inside, the uniformed officers moved to stand guard around the vehicle. Klaus Thank was his family's third generation of defense lawyers and one of the country's most controversial advocates. Wisting had met him in connection with a number of cases and held him in some regard. Controversial and much criticized, he had been provocative in expressing his support for legalizing narcotics, for example, introducing euthanasia, permitting prostitution, and removing the minimum age of sexual consent. These were challenging opinions that offended many. He had been forced to endure being called a male chauvinist pig and a misogynist, but Wisting respected him as a custodian of minority views and considered him a valuable asset to the rule of law. A distinguished, fearless spokesperson, he stood up for the weakest outcasts in society and took on the least popular cases. Always unbiased, he showed his clients a great deal of care and concern. Many of them were offenders who were despised and held in contempt. Pedophile molesters, rapists, killers, racists, and wife abusers. Tom Kerr was one of these. Now 43 years old, Thanker had defended him for the first time 25 years ago. At that time, he had been found guilty of 7 counts of voyeurism and slaughtering pet animals belonging to several of his neighbors. Wisting had read up on it. In court, his explanation had been that he found an outlet for his anger by torturing and killing animals. Wisting could just make out the contours of the 2 men behind the tinted car windows. Now and again he could discern some movement, as if one of them was pointing or clarifying something. "What on earth do they have to talk about?" Hammer asked, sounding agitated. "Good God, they spent an hour together in the prison before they left." Wisting wondered whether he should have a word with Line. But at that moment the car doors burst open again. Klaus Thank smoothed down his suit jacket as Tom Kerr stood waiting. Stiller approached to reattach the microphone and transmitter, and Line put on her earphones. "Are you ready?" Stiller asked. Nodding, Kerr spat on the ground before raising his hands as far as the handcuffs would allow and pointing to a track on the other side of the meadow. "We go that way," he said. Chapter 4. The track was little used. Line, number 5 in the procession, immediately behind Stiller, was continually forced to grasp the branches of nearby trees as they sprang back after the others had passed by. She had become acquainted with Adrian Stiller through 2 previous cases. The first had been when she was still working with the Verdens Gang newspaper, making a podcast about an unsolved kidnapping case from the 80s. The other was the previous year, when she had been appointed to a special investigation team tasked with tracing the origins of a considerable sum of money found in the summer cabin belonging to a recently deceased politician. She had contributed to the resolution of both cases. Stiller had turned out to be a meticulous investigator, but she also found that he always harbored an ulterior motive in everything he did. This was the 3rd assignment she had carried out for him and the Cold Cases group. The first of these had involved producing illustrations for an internal publication. The second had required her to document a reconstruction during which a man had confessed to a murder committed almost 12 years ago. This, however, was different. When he'd phoned her a week earlier, she had thought it had been to ask her out at first. The question had hung in the air somehow, and she had already rehearsed how she would turn him down. Although he was attractive, and the difference in their ages was not so significant. He was only 6 years older. She would prefer to maintain the professional relationship they had developed. The long procession moved slowly along the track with no one uttering a word. Line had no idea what Tom Kerr had said about Tara Noram's murder, but she was well aware of what he had done to the other 2 victims. They had been callous and sadistic crimes, with both girls held captive for several days, subjected to sexual torture, and in the end suffering harrowing deaths. They had been raped repeatedly, including with various implements, and some of these had been heated before being rammed into them. In each case, the intestines and urinary tract were internally torn and damaged, and the post-mortems showed that the nipples had been ripped off with pliers while the victims were still alive. After they were killed, their bodies had been dismembered, and the head, arms, and legs separated from the rest of the bodies, probably to facilitate disposal of the corpses. She turned round without deflecting the camera and noticed that her father was one of the last in line. He looked old, she thought, his movements sluggish. If it had not been for Tom Kerr being slowed down by the leg irons, he would most likely be trailing behind. The wind-blown tree blocked the track, and Kerr needed assistance to step over it. "Stiller!" her father was shouting. "Yes." "A word before we move on." Adrian Stiller ordered the procession to a halt as Wisting approached. Line heard their murmured conversation through her headphones, transmitted via Stiller's microphone. "I don't like this," her father said. "We're more than 100 meters along this track already. There's no logic to it." "What's your thinking?" Stiller asked. "The other burial sites were less than 20 meters from where he parked his car. Why on earth would he have carried this body so far?" Stiller glanced back along the track before turning and gazing ahead. "Is there far to go?" he asked, now addressing Kerr. Line zoomed in on the prisoner and listened through her earphones as he smacked his lips and spat on the ground again. "No," he answered. "How far is it then?" Kerr shrugged and gave a languid reply. "A couple of 100 meters. We come to an older sheep enclosure on the right-hand side with an opening in it. Then we'll be right there." Stiller took a few paces towards him. "Why did you bring her so far from the road?" he asked. "So that she wouldn't be found," Kerr replied. "It worked, didn't it?" "I know what enclosure he's talking about," Line heard her father say. "It's at least 300 meters further on." Graham had come to join them. "What's up?" he asked. Stiller had no chance to answer before Klaus Thunk intervened. Sorry it's so far for you to walk, but he really must be allowed to show us the exact location where she can be found, he said in an ironic tone. This should have been made clear earlier, Graham said. He refused to give us that information until we were here, on the spot, Stiller explained. He wouldn't specify the direction we would take or how far it would be. Chains rattled further ahead along the track. The leg irons meant that Tom Kerr had to dip his head in order to scratch his forehead. We'll go on, Stiller decided. Kittle Graham sent the dog handler on ahead with instructions to walk as far as the sheep enclosure. The others continued at Tom Kerr's pace. After a few meters, he tripped on a tree root. He fell forward and tried to throw out his hands, but the leg irons held him back. He managed to twist onto his side so that his right shoulder took the impact when he hit the ground. 2 men had to haul him up again. Are you okay? Adrian Stiller demanded. Kerr did not answer. He was busy shaking his body in an attempt to dislodge the dust and dirt he had picked up in the fall. These leg irons are not really suitable for a ramble through the woods, Klaus Thunk protested. It's surely unnecessary to expose my client to danger. He's cooperating and is here to help the police. This is part of the cooperation, Kittle Graham commented, checking that the cuffs were still in place. Continue. They walked on, Tom Kerr still determining their speed and last year's dry leaves rustling under their feet. Lena shifted the camera to her other hand and now carried it at hip height. Despite weighing no more than a couple of kilos, it was awkward to hold aloft and felt heavy and cumbersome. As the track widened and turned north, the surrounding forests changed character, and the dense, deciduous trees were replaced by taller trees with crooked, rough trunks and twisted, warped branches. When Tom Kerr turned and looked back, Lena could hear his breathing through her earphones, ragged and winded. As he turned around again, he lost his balance, and though the nearest policeman tried to grab him, he fell heavily. Lena zoomed in. When he was dragged up again, she noticed that a small cut on his cheek was bleeding. You've got a scratch, Kittle Graham pointed out. Do you want something done about that, or should we move on? Klaus Thunk protested again about the use of handcuffs and leg irons, but received no response. Let's go, Kerr replied. After 2 minutes, an old barbed wire fence could be seen on the right of the track. The pasture on the other side was overgrown and some of the posts had rotted away. Broken fragments of fencing lay in the tall grass. The dog handler, who had been sent ahead, stood waiting beside the remnants of a gate. From there, the ground sloped down towards a stream. The procession stopped. We go down that way, Kerr told them, jerking his head to one side. That's far more difficult terrain than we've been walking so far, Klaus Thunker pointed out. It's hardly advisable to head off down there in chains. You're risking my client sustaining a serious injury. As Kittle Graham and Adrian Stiller conferred with Wisting, Lena adjusted her earphones. Wearing them made her feel sweaty, but she kept them on to listen in on their conversation. "He does have a point," her father said. Stiller agreed. Wisting looked across at the prisoner and then back at Graham. "Are you comfortable with us removing the leg irons?" he asked. Graham nodded his grudging agreement. "As long as we keep the handcuffs." "Then we'll do as you both ask," Stiller said. Tom Kerr had to loosen his belt, and Graham unlocked the clamp around his ankle and drew the chain up through his trouser leg. Then he unhooked the leg irons from the handcuffs and handed them to a policeman wearing a rucksack. Raising his hands to his face, Kerr rubbed his fingers over the wound on his cheek. He got blood on 2 of his fingers and stood for a moment staring at them before putting them into his mouth and licking them clean. The sniffer dog barked impatiently as Kittle Graham gave the order to continue. It was now easier for Kerr to walk, but he did not move any faster. He edged diagonally down through the old pasture towards the point where the stream emerged from the trees. There appeared to be an opening in the fence. There and a cart track on the other side. The uniformed officers followed, fanning out in his wake, as if no one wanted to move too close to the prisoner. Line looked around for her father and saw that he and Nils Hammer were bringing up the rear. The lawyer with the slippery soles was also lagging behind. All of a sudden, Tom Kerr's movement altered. He flexed his knees and thrust his body forward. Line heard a deep, indrawn breath in her ear. Then he broke into a run.